Poppy Playtime is still a mediocre game. It is. Come on! Don't try to tell me that it was a tech demo. Most of us paid $5 for that game when it first came out. It was sold as a standalone product, and it was fair to criticize it like one. It's literally fun for 5 minutes at the end, and while there's something to be said for the tension that's built in the first 95% of the game, ultimately nothing happens and there isn't any compelling gameplay to speak of. The sad part is, Poppy Playtime isn't even considered awful value compared to a lot of the indie horror games we're sold these days. Compared to the price of something like Hello Neighbor or even the cost of going to see a scary movie, $5 is okay, because unlike a trip to the theater, you were able to replay Poppy Playtime as often as you wanted. I'm not sure why anyone other than speedrunners like ASTRALSPIFF actually would play the game again, but you can. The game is a walking simulator. You walk to get the code, get the hand, connect some wires, watch Huggy do a spooky, get some batteries, watch Huggy do another spooky, get the other hand, which doesn't do anything interesting really, solve another puzzle that's totally detached from the narrative and interchangeable, build the cat bee, which barely even counts as a puzzle, and then finally we get the Huggy Wuggy chase. Huggy has some very basic pathing intelligence at the start of the sequence. He slowly chases you around the cat bee room. The moment you enter the vent though, Huggy's AI evaporates and he goes into a fully scripted sequence. Back in January, one of my first videos called Huggy a glorified timer, and I stand by that. If you take too long, Huggy catches you. If you make it in time, he doesn't. None of your actions in the vents have any impact on Huggy's behavior. He always takes the same route, and the same surprises always happen. You can remove Huggy from the sequence entirely, replace him with a timer in the corner of the screen, and trigger a game over upon it reaching 0, and the sequence remains virtually unchanged from a gameplay perspective. On the other hand though, so what? The Huggy vent sequence is really intense the first time you play it. When you don't know how scripted it really is, it's quite cinematic and immersive, and it definitely got my blood pumping the first time I played it, as well as the second time a couple weeks ago. It's a cool sequence, and even though it lacks any depth whatsoever, it's still fun. It's still the most memorable moment in the game. There's a tutorial puzzle with the hand, and then they try to do some more compelling puzzle stuff with the two hands, but it's not really that interesting. More importantly, it doesn't integrate with the core gameplay that people play a game like Poppy Playtime to get. Fun, awesome cinematic chase sequences. These puzzles almost feel like they're from a different game, and while the grab pack is a neat idea, it's completely underutilized in Chapter 1. I didn't expect to ever play Poppy Playtime Chapter 2. I made a big statement telling people not to buy the game, and I personally don't believe in pirating games, although it's none of my business how you or anyone else gets their games. The point is, I assumed that there wouldn't be any way for me to play it. However, after our interview, I ended up asking Enchanted Mob for a free copy of Chapter 2, almost as a joke, but to my surprise, he actually gave one to me. Thus, I was able to experience the game without giving any of my money to them, which was nice, though unexpected. I also played the first 2 chapters of Eckercoaster's game Venge, so I was really able to compare the 2 games and see just how much they had in common. I played Poppy Chapter 2 on stream, and I was immediately frustrated by my inability to turn off the horrible grain filter. The game picks up right where Chapter 1 ended, and after walking through some boring gray hallways, we make it into Elliot Ludwig's office. This office is well designed, and it plays to Mob Game's strengths. They build some pretty impressive set pieces like this. It's almost a shame that they elected to set their game underground because it sort of limits the team's ability to believably include diverse, interesting environments, though they do their best to get around this. Having streamed Eckercoaster's game Venge, I maintain that Poppy Playtime isn't plagiarized, but I did find some uncanny similarities that are probably worth looking into. Not here though, I've covered enough of that scandal, and this video evaluates Poppy on the merits of its gameplay alone. Before that though, a lot of people have asked me to do a face reveal. Dedicated viewers of my channel know that I've actually done a couple of face reveals shortly after I started my channel earlier this year. However, not many people saw them and they were made private pretty quickly. I can tell you, you haven't been missing much, and I'm not liable for any blindness resulting from laying eyes upon my likeness. Still, I figured that since I received my silver play button, I may as well do another, so I will. And it's all thanks to today's sponsor, Monster Legends. Monster Legends is an exciting free-to-play mobile game available on all devices. Build your own empire from over 900 diverse monsters with unique rarities and elements. Gather monsters, breed them, and get rare baby monsters. Get food, gold, and gems, and use them to boost your monster's powers with awesome runes, relics, and talents. Build an alliance with your friends, construct the perfect team, conquer your opponents, win rewards, and make it to the top. There are new monsters coming out every week, so there's always something cool to check out. My favorite thing about Monster Legends is the YouTuber Island, where you can find monsters designed in collaboration with some of the biggest YouTubers out there. I mean, look at this, we can fight Dream. What other game lets you fight Dream? Hey Monster Legends, you guys should add Theft King going to the YouTuber island. I mean, I'm a legendary monster, right? Download Monster Legends now using my special link in the description or the QR code on screen, and you'll receive a free bonus starter pack including 50,000 food, 300,000 gold, 10 gems, and an epic level monster. If enough of you guys download the game, who knows, we may really be able to get Theft King in it one day. Don't wait, check out Monster Legends today and use my link to give yourself a head start as you build your monster empire. Thanks again to Monster Legends for sponsoring this video. Yeah, I'd love to do the ASTRALSPIFF thing where you cut back to yourself talking in the midst of your videos. It would make editing so much easier. I even found the website that they sell the YouTuber costumes on, and I bought one in preparation for appearing on camera. Holy crap, it's like $100 for a pair of sweatpants. I mean, they're cool sweatpants, sure, but still. However, there were a few issues with appearing on camera. The first is that my room has no acoustic treatment, so I need to record with a blanket over my head to get usable audio. As you can imagine, this does not make for great footage. However, even if I could record, I flub my takes so many times it would be unwatchable.
Lazada Pachodi.
All of my voiceovers are stitched together from the few solid takes I was able to belt out. I'm working on it. I've been streaming a lot lately, which is giving me a lot of practice speaking, and I plan to include more of myself in my videos going forward. Thanks again to everybody, and please subscribe. So we run around and do some boring fetch quest stuff with Poppy, but we're also introduced to my favorite mechanic in the game, the Spider-Man swing. My biggest complaint with Chapter 1 was how disconnected the hands felt from the rest of the gameplay. They were used to solve puzzles, flip switches, and open doors, but not much else. Chapter 2 includes these neat moments where you use the grab pack to pull yourself up to areas and swing across chasms, and seeing that made me optimistic that they'd integrate the hands into the chase sequences. At least I hope they do more than simply having the player pull a box down at the very end of them, which was all the hands did in the Chapter 1 Huggy chase. We solve a little puzzle and head down a suspiciously long hallway. When we go to open the door, oh no, Mommy Longlegs comes down from the incredibly high ceiling and steals the red hand. We continue into the game station, a massive underground train station playground thing. It doesn't really make any sense. I thought this was a toy factory. Why would there be like a daycare facility deep underground? The dialogue implies that it's some sort of testing facility for children, which is plausible considering we know the toy factory is just a front for more sinister scientific experiments, but I have to wonder. Next we do a Simon Says minigame, which is, this isn't fun. It's not intense. The jump scare spin on it is that this dude is being lowered down onto you Mission Impossible style, and near the end they throw some little curveballs at you. But outside of that, it's just Simon. They implemented the same thing into Security Breach, and it's honestly just so lazy. Playing Simon unto itself is never compelling gameplay. Maybe it'd be cool if there were sequences where somebody was chasing you and you needed to distract and buy time to complete Simon Says style puzzles, or maybe they could do something where you had to solve them during a Pug-a-Pillar style red light green light section. Imagine the music stopping in the midst of you solving a Simon puzzle and having to sit there motionless for 10 seconds before finally recalling the code and entering it in. That would be cool. Unfortunately, what we get is a neat looking set piece room, some nice animations and visuals. The first minigame we play is Whack-A-Mole with all these Poppy playtimes coming at you, and it's pretty uninspired. You're intended to listen for the enemies crawling at you and bopping them when they get too close. It's really nothing special in terms of gameplay. In terms of horror, I did find myself somewhat overwhelmed at points, but unfortunately by the end of the minigame there are just so many goddamn Poppy playtimes coming at you, you can't possibly be scared. Everywhere you look there's a dude coming at you, and the optimal strategy becomes just spinning in circles whacking Huggies. The optimal strategy becomes just spinning in circles punching every Huggy Wuggy you see. It's not really worth it to prioritize the ones that are closer to attacking you. The segment itself probably lasts about twice as long as it needs to, and it sort of feels like it's there to pad the length of the gameplay. We're now about halfway into Poppy Playtime Chapter 2, but we haven't encountered any meaningful gameplay yet. The first chapter suffered from the same problem, but it was shorter, and the early puzzles were conceivably tutorials. I don't think there was any reason not to let the player hit the ground running in Chapter 2, and I'm not convinced that the incredibly slow-paced start to the game is warranted. We already have 2 of the 3 train code pieces, yet it feels like we're still waiting around for the game to actually start. We're then shepherded to the final minigame, which happens to be far and away the best one, the aforementioned Pug-a-Pillar. Pug-a-Pillar isn't that much different from the prior sections. It's a minigame, this time red light, green light. However, unlike previous ones, we actually get to move throughout the area and explore. We get opportunities to pay attention to the enemy, and it's even the first section so far where the grab pack's mobility mechanics are utilized in any meaningful way. Yeah, we did it! Unfortunately, the experience is ultimately skin deep. The Pugapillar model is really cool, and like all of Mob Games' work, very well designed and animated. However, the enemy isn't really a threat. Like Huggy Wuggy in Chapter 1, PJ doesn't really have any AI. He moves through the area on a pretty fixed path every time, and if you're moving too long after the music has stopped, he jump scares you. It doesn't matter how far you are from him. He'll get you. From a programming standpoint, the PJ character is completely disconnected from his jump scare. They could replace the caterpillar with anything, and the gameplay of this section remains fundamentally unchanged. Sure, the section finally integrates the grab pack in a meaningful way, and you can do neat stuff like swinging from monkey bars into slides, but none of this is necessary. You can very easily outrun PJ without ever utilizing the mobility mechanics, even if you ultimately choose to take the most difficult path and pick up the trophy. Are you kidding? Just retracting the hand killed me. The section promises to be a lot more interesting than it actually is, and once the player is finally comfortable and enjoying themselves, it ends. This is the biggest flaw in Poppy Playtime Chapter 2's approach. It plays more like a mediocre minigame collection than it does a game. The game station challenges that Mommy sends you through are interchangeable and trivial. They're completely disconnected from the rest of the gameplay, and they have nothing to do with the story. It's not as if the minigames we play are contradictory to the story. They aren't. They provide some weird lore justification in which Mommy is insane and is compelling you to play these games for some reason. The problem is that the minigames have nothing to do with our goal, and thus it feels like busy work. One of my biggest criticisms of Security Breach was that Gregory is never given a compelling goal or incentive throughout the game. It makes everything you do feel meaningless. Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 has the same problems. We don't know our protagonist's motivations for showing up at Playtime Co. We don't understand why we care about Poppy or why we want to rescue her, if we even do. We don't ever get a good reason to care, and without one, I couldn't help but step back during some of these ridiculous minigames and say, what the hell am I even doing here? It's at this point that Chapter 2 actually starts to kick into gear. We escape Mommy's game, enraging her and triggering what I can only describe as an awesome roller coaster ride of chase. Similar to the Huggy sequence at the end of Chapter 1, Mommy Longlegs stalks and hunts the player throughout the maintenance tunnels around Playtime Co. Moments like this are what mob games do best, highly scripted cinematic adrenaline rushes. Mommy's chase scene is very controlled. Everyone basically experiences it the same way. Thus, it's not scary on subsequent playthroughs. You know exactly what to do, and there isn't much variability to the actions that Mommy Longlegs can take. However, it's still really fun the first time around. It really gets your blood pumping, and it provides some great moments. When Mommy first chased me back into the furnace room, I quickly realized that I could hide behind the flames in the furnace, and without thinking much, I tried it, and it worked. In hindsight, hiding there was the only solution, but the sequence was scripted so well I didn't even notice. It felt cool. It felt organic. The same goes for the moment where you pull yourself up into the rafters again to hide from Mommy. You explore the rafters a few minutes prior while solving a puzzle, and relying on the player to recall this location and repurpose it as a hiding place during a subsequent chase sequence is really solidly done. It also complements their cinematic abilities well. Staring down at Mommy as she frantically searches around for you is really cool, and again, it gets your heart pounding. All of the animation in the game is really solid. You can tell it's one of Mob Games' biggest strengths, which makes sense. They were originally an animation studio. The game looks pretty nice, and the scope of the factory is often pretty impressive. Unfortunately, the game is so highly scripted, most of the chase sequences need to take place in small corridors. Scripting AI for large areas is really hard. Steel Wool surely had far more resources to build Security Breach than Mob Games did for Poppy, yet even the former struggled to make meaningfully threatening enemies operate in larger areas. By confining the player to tight linear corridors, developers don't need to account for as much variability in the player's movement. Near the end of the game, we're given one final puzzle. I haven't mentioned them, but spread throughout the game are a variety of puzzles, usually involving connecting two wires or pulling some crap around, I don't know. Poppy Playtime, everybody. They're not very good. You can tell that they're going for a portal chamber style approach, and I do think something like the grab pack could be utilized well in a game like that. However, Poppy Playtime isn't that game. Nobody is buying Poppy Playtime for the complex puzzles. It's all about the cinematic chase sequences. One of the big claims that Poppy made early in its marketing materials was that it was more than just a walking simulator. While there's some evidence that this was a dig at a common criticism of Coaster's game Venge, Enchanted Mob told me that this was actually in response to one of the major criticisms of Bendy and the Ink Machine, a game that both Poppy Playtime and Venge cite as being influential. I worry that they might have taken this part a little bit too seriously though. I think Mob Games recognize that their strengths are in cinematic scripted sequences, and I think they went out of their way to add all these puzzles and minigames to Poppy in an attempt to preempt criticism that their game was a walking simulator. As I mentioned before, the puzzles feel so disconnected from the rest of the game, it's almost as if they said to themselves, crap, everything has been scripted for the last 10 minutes, let's throw a puzzle in to remind the player that they're supposed to be playing a game. I don't think this is necessary though. Ask anyone what their favorite part of Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 was, and they'll tell you the awesome Huggy vent chase. Ask anyone what their favorite favorite part of Chapter 2 was, and they'll tell you the mommy chase, or perhaps mommy's awesome demise, which again relies on the strength of Mob Games' animation talents, not compelling gameplay. All you do is flip a switch and she dies. Nobody is buying the game because of the puzzles, and I honestly think future chapters would be better served with less of them, less minigame filler fluff, and more cool cinematic scripted sequences. For all its faults, Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 scripted sequences are really memorable, and they're fun the first time you play them. I hate to say it because I support Steel Wool Studios and I don't support Mob Games, but I think I had more fun playing Poppy Playtime Chapters 1 and 2 than I did Security Breach. Sure, there's a lot more content in Security Breach, it's a much bigger game. However, no individual moments hold up to Poppy's best, and Poppy's shorter duration means that the boring minigames and puzzles make up a smaller duration of the whole, and thus the admittedly fun and exciting scripted chase sequences stand out more as a larger portion of the whole. The truth is, very few games are going to continue to scare the player on a second playthrough. Most will stop scaring the player well before the end of the first, even if the scares are dynamic rather than scripted. It even happens in what I would consider some of the best, scariest AAA horror games out there. Games like Outlast, its sequel, and Alien Isolation. With this in mind, I actually think Poppy Playtime's scripted haunted house style approach works really well for indie games, and I'd like to see more experiences like that. Ecker Coaster's game Venge goes for this, and it does it quite well. There are puzzles, yes, but the puzzles just serve to compel the player to explore the area and encounter more fun, spooky, scripted moments. Poppy's puzzles don't usually integrate scares into them. You just kind of sit around, solve the puzzle, and then the game decides, alright, time to start running again. It really does feel like they were added solely to pad the game's length and justify doubling the price over the previous chapter, which again already felt like a demo that cost money. Organic dynamic horror experiences are the best, it's true. However, they're incredibly difficult to pull off, especially for indie developers. You need a ton of time, money, and incredibly talented, experienced people to pull it off. Security Breach failed by being overambitious and relying too much on AI that just didn't work. Poppy Playtime fails by consistently needing to remind us that it's a game, that it's more than a walking simulator or whatever. Why? Who cares? Wouldn't you prefer it more if Poppy ditched all the puzzles and instead those resources and time were put towards adding several more awesome cinematic chase sequences to the game? If Chapter 2 had cut out Whack-A-Wuggy and musical memory, spent more time developing Pug-A-Pillar, and added 2 new chase sequences to the game, don't you think you would have enjoyed it more? Sure, the runtime might be substantially lower without all that stuff, but I'd argue it's all filler anyway. It's all fluff. $10 is a little steep for Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 as it stands, but do you really feel any less ripped off simply because you spent an extra hour in the game doing trivial puzzle nonsense? I'd rather the game be half as long but twice as good. The scripted sequences are the best part, and I'm confident it's the reason most of us are interested in the game in the first place. So Mob Games and all other indie developers, don't worry so much about cramming traditional game mechanics into your horror projects. Think about what people really want out of your game and what they're really going to remember once they've finished. Think about why people are paying the cost of entry and what they hope to get out of it. And to my fellow fans of indie horror, we really need to stop evaluating a game's value based solely on dollars to total play hours ratio. It's just not a meaningful metric, and I worry that it's encouraging developers to pad their games with fluff and nonsense, instead of focusing on what they're good at and what made their games special in the first place. Shorter, scripted horror games are fine. It's one of the things indie developers can actually pull off with their small teams and often non-existent budgets. I want people to make games like that, but it's not going to happen if we as gamers thoroughly reject any game that could potentially be called a walking simulator. Sure, a fully scripted haunted house might not technically count as a game, but whatever it is, it can be a lot of fun, and I really enjoy the ones that are well made. I'd like to see more of them. Thanks again to Monster Legends for sponsoring this video. Download Monster Legends now using the link in the description to get access to your special rewards. Thanks for watching.